There's a voice in your head that talks to you about you. And if you pay attention to how it speaks, the tone, the specific phrases, the timing, you'll notice something unsettling. It doesn't sound like you talking to yourself. It sounds like someone talking to you. It has a vocabulary. It has favored accusations. It shows up at particular moments with particular lines, and it's remarkably consistent across years. That's not a coincidence, and it's not a metaphor. Today, I want to explain where that voice actually comes from, why it's so much harsher than anything you'd say to another human being, why the standard advice for dealing with it mostly fails, and what actually changes it. This is Patterns We Carry. Let's go. Start with something you can test right now. Think about how you talk to yourself after you make a mistake. Now, imagine saying those exact words in that exact tone to a friend who'd made the same mistake. Most people find this genuinely difficult to imagine. Not because they're being modest, because the words are unusable. You would never say them to another person. You'd consider it cruel. Some people, doing this exercise, find they wouldn't say those things to someone they actively disliked. So, here's the question that opens everything up. Where did a voice come from that speaks to you in a register you'd consider abusive if directed at anyone else? The answer, in most cases, is that it came from outside. Here's the developmental picture, and I want to lay it out carefully because the pop psychology version is usually a blunt instrument. Children don't arrive with an internal evaluator. The capacity to assess your own behavior is learned, and it's learned by internalizing the evaluations that came from the environment. This is well-established developmental psychology. A child gradually takes external regulation and makes it internal, which is how self-control develops at all. That process is normal and necessary. A person with no internal evaluator would be unable to function socially. The voice isn't a malfunction, it's supposed to be there. What varies is what got internalized. If the external voices were mostly proportionate, correction that addressed behavior, delivered without contempt, alongside plenty of warmth, then the internal version tends to be a useful editor. It notices errors, suggests corrections, and doesn't attack the person. If the external voices were harsh, contemptuous, unpredictable, or attached your worth to your performance, then that's the tone that got installed. And crucially, the child had no capacity to evaluate whether the treatment was fair. Children don't think, "That was an unreasonable response from a stressed adult." They think, "I am the kind of person who deserves that." So the harshness gets stored not as an opinion someone had about you, but as a fact about you. And facts don't get argued with. They just sit there, self-evident. Now, 3 things about this voice that explain why it's so hard to shift. 1. It was originally protective. This is the part that makes it stubborn. A harsh inner critic is often, in origin, a defense. If you grow up in an environment where mistakes bring painful consequences, then developing a voice that catches your mistakes first is genuinely adaptive. If you criticize yourself before anyone else does, you're prepared. It hurts less coming from inside. You've taken the blow at a moment of your choosing.
That is a clever solution for a child with limited options. It's just an extremely costly one to run for 30 years afterward. 2. It takes credit for your successes. Here's the trap that keeps people from letting it go, and it's the one I most want you to hear. Almost everyone with a punishing inner critic believes, at some level, that the critic is why they've achieved anything, that the harshness is the engine, that if they were kinder to themselves, they'd become complacent and everything would collapse. This belief is extremely common, extremely persuasive from the inside, and largely unsupported by the evidence. Research on self-criticism and performance points fairly consistently the other way. Harsh self-criticism is associated with more avoidance, more procrastination, and more difficulty recovering from setbacks, not less. Self-compassion tends to correlate with greater persistence, not laziness. The mechanism makes sense once you see it. If failure triggers a savage internal response, then attempting anything difficult carries an additional cost on top of the task. So you avoid the difficult thing, or delay it, or don't start until the pressure is unbearable.
The critic doesn't drive performance, it taxes it, and then takes credit for whatever survived. You didn't succeed because of the voice. You succeeded despite carrying it, which is more impressive and much more tiring. 3. It's indiscriminate. A useful evaluator is specific. That email was unclear. The critic generalizes. You're incompetent. You always do this. That's the difference between something that helps and something that harms. Behavior can be changed. Identity can't. That's why the inner critic creates despair instead of improvement. It gives you a verdict you can't act on. So, what actually works? The usual advice is to fight negative thoughts with positive affirmations. Tell yourself you're capable. Repeat that you're enough. For people with a harsh inner critic, that often backfires. If you deeply believe you're inadequate, saying, "I'm competent," simply invites your mind to produce every failure it has carefully stored for years. You can't out-argue a voice that's been collecting selective evidence for decades. Instead, try 4 things. First, identify the source. Listen to its words and tone. Whose voice does it sound like? A parent? A teacher? A coach? Often, it's not your own judgment at all. It's an old recording that you've been replaying for years. Once you recognize it as a voice rather than the truth, you can evaluate it instead of obeying it. Second, create distance. Instead of saying, "I'm useless," say, "I'm noticing the thought that I'm useless." That small shift, used in acceptance-based psychology, moves the thought from something you're trapped inside to something you're observing. You don't have to argue with it. Just stop treating it as reality. Third, demand specifics. When the critic says you're a failure, ask, specifically, what went wrong? Real feedback becomes actionable. Most inner criticism can't answer. It's often just tone without useful information. Fourth, use someone you care about as the standard. Imagine a close friend made the same mistake. What would you say to them? Most people instantly respond with fairness, warmth, and perspective. The ability to be compassionate already exists. You've simply excluded yourself from receiving it. Here's the important part. At some point, a younger version of you heard something often enough that they accepted it as true. The voice isn't yours. It never was. You just learned it early enough that it feels like it is. Changing that won't happen overnight, but it starts with one simple question. Whose voice is that? If this resonated, the next episode explores why we recreate the emotional patterns we grew up with in our adult relationships. Subscribe to Patterns We Carry for weekly psychology deep dives. And in the comments, if you're comfortable, whose voice does your inner critic sound like?